WBUR Podcasts, Boston.
I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and you're listening to The Common. I'm here with WBUR reporter Walter Wuthmann. Walter, how are you feeling today?
Daryl, I'm awake.
Yeah, I heard you had a late night.
The news never sleeps, I guess. Neither do I, or I will later.
Yeah, man. Let's hurry up and let's get you a nap. We are talking to you on Thursday morning after you spent some time last night at the MGM Music Hall in Fenway. But you were not there for a concert. You were there to hear our Boston Mayor Michelle Wu give her first State of the City address. What was the energy like in the room?
The energy was high. People were really excited to be there. As you said, it was Michelle Wu's first address. MGM Music Hall is this big new music venue next to Fenway Park, so it didn't have those sort of stuffy government vibes. There were probably 3,000 people there. Everyone was dressed up. It had sort of a gala feel. People really, really excited to mark this moment. Michelle Wu being the first woman, the first person of color elected mayor of Boston. And this was her first State of the City speech, which is the big annual event where the mayor of Boston gets to reflect on how well they say they're doing and lay out priorities for the next year ahead.
Walk us through it. What were some of the top points she made during the speech?
So these speeches, notoriously are heavy on ceremony and pomp and circumstance and kind of light on policy. But Michelle Wu, being sort of the self-proclaimed wonk mayor that she is, she flipped that on its head. She announced a lot of policy and really dove into specific government initiatives in this speech.
Well, transportation and infrastructure has been a big priority for Mayor Wu. What does she have to say about her plan for that?
Yeah, she, reiterated the fact that she is pushing at the state level to get a Boston-specific seat on the MBTA's board of directors. As you know, as a former transportation reporter, Daryl, the MBTA is the state agency, but a lot of its services are in Boston. So advocates for years have been pushing for more specific representation from Boston on that board. She reiterated that. She highlighted the 3 free bus lines that her administration put in place. And then on infrastructure, she said she's going to sign an executive order ordering that all new city buildings and major renovations be fossil fuel free. She set out a timeline to get fossil fuels out of all Boston public housing properties, and highlighted all the bike lanes her administration has built and committed to building more in the years ahead.
Okay. I also understand education has been a big issue for her, having avoided the state takeover of the Boston School District. What does she have to say about the city schools?
Yeah, it's a big deal that the city is keeping control of its schools. This is Wu's opportunity to implement a lot of reforms, fix school buildings to boost performance. So she committed $50 million to enhancing special education inclusion in the schools. She committed to hiring more bilingual social workers to work in school buildings. And she announced this pilot program where seniors at Fenway High School can elect to stay a 5th year and take classes at UMass Boston so they can be accumulating college credit while they're still in high school, get a head start on college, and save a lot of money.
Okay. She brought up the BPDA. And for folks who are familiar with Michelle Wu, it's fair to say she's not the biggest fan of the BPDA. There's a lot of history there, a lot of bad history there. Can you first tell the listeners who may not be aware, what is the BPDA, and then break down what Michelle Wu had to say about her plans for that agency?
So the Boston Planning and Development Agency is this huge and powerful agency that oversees the vast majority of development in Boston. And it's sort of been cobbled together like a Frankenstein over decades, through urban renewal policies. So it encompasses quite a lot. It owns and develops buildings, but it also oversees the permitting and development process for much of the private development in the city. So this is kind of how Wu laid out her fundamental criticism of the agency in the speech on Wednesday night.
Since 2016, It's been called the Boston Planning and Development Agency, or BPDA, but the focus on building buildings rather than community has held back the talent of its staff and deepened disparities in our city.
For years, community advocates like Michelle Wu used to be have argued that it's kind of a conflict of interest that the BPDA both owns and develops buildings and then also oversees the development process for private developers. They've wanted it split up. Michelle Wu has called to abolish it. So last night, she laid out the first steps in dismantling this agency. She said she was going to start moving staff out of the BPDA and into a new city planning and design department. She's also setting up a new planning advisory council of cabinet heads and city leaders to sort of chart the course of how they're going to continue to reform this agency in the years ahead.
Okay, so that's the BPDA. How is she thinking about housing? Did she bring that up during the speech? We know she has this plan to introduce a proposal for rent control in the city. So what does she have to say about that?
Definitely. I think most of the speech was dedicated to housing. That was kind of the theme of the year. She said she was funneling millions of dollars of federal money into housing. She said that through a city audit, they had identified over 150 vacant city-owned lots that were ready for development right now. They were going to offer them up to developers, and anyone with a good plan to build affordable housing on those lots could get the land for free. And then, as you mentioned, the big kind of marquee issue right now is rent control, which is sort of a third rail in Massachusetts politics that Michelle Wu is jumping right onto without fear. It's sort of a compromise plan as it stands, and it's already drawn a lot of criticism, including from Boston city councilors who were in the audience last night. After the speech, I found Councilor Tanya Fernandez-Anderson. She has been vocal in her criticism of Michelle Wu's proposal. She thinks it's not progressive enough. Here's a little bit of what she told me.
It wasn't totally what the advocates in the community have been fighting for, but I think it's a work in progress. So let's get to it. We'll get to the chamber. We'll figure it out, right? We'll iron out the kinks, and hopefully we'll get the best rent control out.
So she needs to convince the city council. She needs to convince state legislators who were also there in the audience that night. And she needs to convince the new governor, who was sitting right up front last night as well.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with more on the state of the city.
Did you kill Marlene Johnson?
I think you're one of the first people to have actually asked.
From WBUR and ZSP Media, this is Beyond All Repair, a new podcast about an unsolved murder that will leave you questioning everything.
Somebody should be in jail for murdering my sister.
A woman who's never been believed.
As long as they think I have done this, then they're not looking for who actually did this.
And that's what makes it a cold case.
No, it's a botched case.
And a search for the truth, once and for all.
Wow, it just gets more interesting.
Beyond All Repair. Listen and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
Be careful. You're digging in a place that's been very peaceful for a while.
Do it anyway. Dig.
And we're back. So she has some pretty ambitious goals for the future, but I'm curious to know how she reflected back on her first year in office.
It was really positive. As an observer, she seems to really like being the mayor of Boston. One moment that really stuck out to me was, amongst all of this policy and these new proposals, she said, we're doing all of this on top of filling 5,000 potholes,
collecting more than 500 tons of curbside composting, and plowing through 53 inches of snow last year.
So these are just the nuts and bolts, basic functioning of city government. And she seems to really love that part of the job. That was a huge applause line, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, she did not touch on some of the harder aspects of the job. We know it's been a difficult year. There have been the protesters outside of her house, fighting the the vaccine mandate, banging pots and pans and yelling at times racist and sexist slurs at her, at her family in the house. She's in a long and bitter fight with the police union over their contract that might be going to an arbitrator soon. It has not all been sunshine and roses for Mayor Wu in her first year. But last night in her speech, she seemed happy and self-assured and excited for the years ahead.
So it sounds like a lot was covered in this speech. When you spoke to people after the event, what did they have to say?
Yeah, the speech was well received. As I said, it was a welcoming crowd to begin. They stood and clapped for her before she even started. But Councillor Anderson, who I spoke to about her criticisms of Michelle Wu's rent control policy, apart from that, she had really high marks for the speech itself. Here's what she said.
It was nice and easy and quick. It wasn't boring. I mean, the woman memorized her entire speech. It was incredible.
Yeah, Wu she's a classically trained musician. So it kind of felt like she had prepared for this speech like a recital.
In your opinion, Walt, you cover the city a lot. Is there anything you expected to be in the speech that maybe wasn't as heavily hit as you or the people you spoke to might have expected?
The speech was a little light on education, which she addressed and sort of teed up saying, I'll have more to say next year on this. So if this year was the housing speech, she was suggesting that next year is going to be the education speech. There was a lot about housing affordability, but some people in the crowd I spoke with after, Councillor Anderson, State Senator Liz Miranda, said they would have loved to hear even more specifically about, racial equity and the racial wealth gap in Boston.
Walt, thank you so much for coming through and talking with us after having such a long night.
Thank you. Thanks, Daryl.
That's WBUR reporter Walter Wuthmann. And that's our show for today. Thank you so much for listening to The Common. Make sure you hit us up on Twitter or Instagram at WBUR The Common, or you can send us an email at thecommon@wbur.org. And I gotta let you know, The Common is produced by Franny Monahan and Caitlin Harrop. It's mixed by Emily Jankowski, Matt Reed, and Paul Vaitkus. It's edited by Ben Brock Johnson. And from the newsroom of WBUR, I'm your host, Daryl C. Murphy. I'll talk to you later.